That was amazing. That was amazing.
I feel like so many people relate to this. I mean, I've spoken to so many people about first year, and they were like, yeah, I didn't enjoy it, wasn't what I wanted. And I feel like so many people only really found themselves later in their university career.
Yeah.
So I think this is going to speak to like so many people.
It's interesting also how, so I spoke to my sister about this because for me, her experience has always been such a positive one, and she'd really changed and just become this amazing person at university. And she was like, it's interesting how you see that, but for me, it was a completely different experience. So I think that's again speaking to the danger of like the one-sided story where you see someone without the full picture. Yeah, so I also think that this speaks to a lot of people.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'd be interested also to hear your experiences of university, like first year adjusting. How was it different to school, that kind of thing?
Sure. I think I actually, oh, sorry, I don't know if anyone's speaking. But I wanted to address this whole thing of having sort of a single story when it comes to varsity, and the idea that, you know, these are the best years of your life. You'll find your lifelong friends. And there's so much, I think, idealism that comes with going into university. I know for me there was. Um, how productive is that? How true is that? What are your thoughts on that? I mean, I guess your presentation's really spoken to that, to say that your reality doesn't always meet your expectation. But, you know, especially in terms of the social realm, how is that matched up to your expectations?
So I think for me, I have largely stayed friends with my friends from school, and I think that that was kind of uh, due to many things, also in part because I had quite a tight-knit grade. But I think there is a lot of social pressure, and it comes from this idea that you, for the first time, are going to be like free, and you're going to be out of the house, and you're just going to have this incredible time. I think a lot of it is in hindsight. I think it comes from like parents telling, or certain parents who've had the privilege of going to university telling their children about their like varsity days and like the wild times that they had. And I think, or at least this is what happened to me, is I ended up just consciously all the time thinking about how I wasn't doing this and how I wasn't making these incredible friends. And I think it takes time, and that's what the important thing is that like for me, it took my whole undergraduate degree kind of to really feel like I fitted in. And it also, I think, came with classes getting smaller when you start to specialize. In third year, like I knew everyone in my class for certain subjects, which was great because that obviously impacts on how well you know everyone. Whereas at school, you've spent 5 years with the people, at least if you went to high school with them. So I think the pressure is just counterproductive because you focus on that rather than actually experiencing and trying to just like acclimatize to the challenges. Can't say, I think it was you.
Oh, yeah, so I mean, I almost had the opposite experience. I mean, I loved my first year. Like, you know, I know we were raised together, so I think like you could also have like seen that side. Like, I loved meeting people, and like, you know, I guess you would have seen me as flourishing. But I mean, I definitely started to experience like that pressure more in like second year when, you know, my own personal issues started coming through. And I think there's an issue at university where it doesn't allow people to deal with stuff. You know, you are expected to be doing well, you're expected to pass everything, you're expected to do so much. And there's very little time to struggle with stuff. And I think it's so toxic because it's like it's very suited to one sort of person, like a very extroverted someone who really enjoys a certain type of socializing, and even like the like first year events that are often organized by reses are very suited to a certain type of person. And so, yeah, I think the way the first year experiences are run and the way first year's like approached is not suited to everyone. And yeah, I just think that whole thing, besides just the pressure we put on people, that
Yeah.
needs to change. And like people need to acknowledge that they're different, and that certain things suit.
Yeah, I think that that's very true about like all the events that were run were very much about, it was, I think, a specific type of socializing. So a lot of people shied away from that. And I think it often you feel quite alone when you don't participate in those things. And even when you do, I think for me, I felt like I had to prove myself a lot of the time. I didn't feel like it came naturally to me. And so, I don't know if it's frozen. So yeah, I think isn't always easy. But I suppose also it's like normalizing the fact that it isn't always going to be easy and trying to maybe open up a conversation about that, because I don't think you can always expect everything to accommodate you. Obviously, like that's the goal, but I think it's more about having a safe space to talk about that and having people to share their experience with.
And then my second question is, how much do you think, being someone that excelled, you were like deputy head girl, you're very good academically, you're part of a lot of, do you think that placed even more pressure on you? Those titles like hold you back in a way, or not hold you back, but like, you know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, completely. I think
Also the same.
what
Okay, I'll ask it later.
sorry, I think for me what was interesting is I almost felt like in school I'd been forced into this role of being this specific type of person, or it was kind of this thought I had that I was like, going to be just carefree and just do whatever I wanted. All of this had been imposed on me because I had like been naturally academically inclined and things like that. And I was like, yeah, I'm just going to have this like budding social life and all of these things. And I think what I realized is that I wasn't really built for that. And I also think that when I let things like my academics slip and didn't try and like focus. So basically, for example, I did shorter education in the first semester of first year. And after a while, I was like, no, this is infringing too much on my academics. And like they were already pretty tenuous. And I just ended up quitting that. And I was like, I've always been overcommitted. And now I just need to have a time where I'm just thinking about, myself kind of, which is fine. But I think in hindsight, a lot of those things weren't imposed on me. It's because I actually like really did enjoy caring about my academics. I really did enjoy trying to like contribute to social justice programs and things that outside of the university sphere that I could care about, because it wasn't enough for me to just have academics and like a social life. So I think what I realized is that a lot of those things like actually brought me happiness. And so I suppose it's like not the best to base your happiness on external
You feel like you
aids,
almost
but
like cut off parts of you that you really enjoyed, like
yeah,
tutoring, so you could make more time for drawing because that's what everyone said you should be making time for.
yeah, exactly. Or
Yeah.
just, yeah, trying to fit into this image of what I thought I wanted to be. And realizing that like I couldn't be that person because I just wasn't, yeah, supposed to be.
Yeah. And then my last thing is, I know when we were both in Raised together, um, I mean, we both come from like sheltered backgrounds, white spaces, and then coming into a university when fees must fall was like at its height. How did that impact your whole idea of first year? Like,
I think, yeah, that is quite a loaded subject. I was maybe going to like include something about it, but then I realized that it wouldn't really be giving enough attention to a topic that needs a lot of conversation. I suppose, I think just in my personal capacity, it again led to uncertainty, and I was already feeling very uncertain and like I had no structure to my life. And I think that the 3 weeks, I think, or I'm not exactly sure how long it was, where we just didn't have lectures, just was not good for my my academics or like my headspace, but I don't think it's really about me. So I think what was important was to be exposed to those conversations. And I think since then, I think we've all become a lot better at understanding and contributing to conversations about race and privilege and class. I think at school, I felt like there was a lack of conversation around those topics, and it was always kind of shied away from. And now I know my school in particular is trying to make changes. I think they're very incremental, but I feel like I didn't have the correct tools to participate actively or positively to a conversation like Fees Must Fall. I think, yeah, also probably just being a bit self-centered in first year and not actually taking the time to understand what was going on beyond what was going on in my immediate surroundings. So I think that I've learned from those mistakes, I think, and now try and actively participate and research and understand, because I think that it's important, especially for people like us, well, white privileged South Africans, to participate in the conversation and understand what's going on beyond like the vilifying of protesters that happens in the media.
Yeah, thank you for sharing your experience. I think just to talk about, I think I had a very similar high school experience to you, probably, in terms of being relatively academically gifted and expecting that to continue, or feeling like I should expect it. And my university experience was, I don't know, I guess a little smoother, where my academics did carry over, and I think largely, luckily, but also in part to the way that Cambridge is structured, I made quite good friends quite quickly. I think when you're stuck with people for like 9 hours a day, you're bound to meet someone you like hanging out with. It's the same as the experience of going into smaller structured classes for you guys. But what I really liked about your conversation, what you were saying, is like normalizing the idea of not enjoying university. So by all accounts, it should have been smooth sailing, and I still wouldn't say that university has been particularly fun. And for me, I think that's largely rooted in, I found academics at varsity very unrewarding or unsatisfying, where it feels like even if I do well, it's because I found, like, they asked a nice question, or I figured out the system best for that course, or that it doesn't ever feel like at school when you did well in something, it felt like you were being rewarded for hard work or being good at a subject. Whereas there's something about the way that varsity tests, and maybe it's how quickly the courses go, and yeah, whether you get the past paper or not, that's the one that they copy the questions out of. But it's that experience of your academics, even when you are doing pretty well, doesn't feel like you're getting much out. And because you're spending so much of your day on those things, for me, it was a very unrewarding experience. So yeah, I think my takeaway from this whole thing is, you know what, actually varsity is really hard, whether that's academic or social or both. And you really don't have to enjoy it, whereas that rhetoric of it being the best time ever is very much the common story. And for whatever reason, I don't think it always is.
Yeah, I think that is a good takeaway. I think a lot of my issues in my undergraduate came from the fact that I was in quite a anonymous space, like being in a humanities degree, doing subjects. I did economics, French, and economic history, which were in like 3 very different departments. So I didn't really have much overlap between the people who were in my different classes. So luckily I had some friends from school who'd carried over, who'd done some of the same subjects as me. But I think, like, you know, in the economics department, it felt like everyone was doing business science, and so everyone knew each other quite well. And in the history department, a lot of people were doing like other similar subjects. So I think it was, now doing law, where there's a very structured class timetable, I think it makes the experience a much smoother transition from school. But I also don't think that that's necessarily the best thing. I think people also have problems with that, with being in the same classes with the same people every single day. But I do think also in terms of my law degree, it's helped me academically to know people in my class. I think it helps challenge you because people hold you accountable, or like you discuss academics a lot. And I also think that just feeling comfortable in your classes, that was a big issue for me. In first year, I'd go into a lecture hall and the whole time I'd be thinking about like what people thought of me because I didn't know anyone and I was sitting by myself, as opposed to thinking about like what was going on in a lecture. And I think that that's a struggle that's common for a lot of people. I remember like trying to introduce myself to some random person and they were like, why the hell are you talking to me? So yeah, I think that having a more intimate environment helps. But I completely agree that university doesn't have to be the best time of your life. Like we are going to live probably, hopefully all goes well till we're like 80, 90. Like there's so much time. And it also puts a lot of pressure on you to achieve a lot and have this best time within this really concise period, which isn't necessarily going to happen.
Just to ask a question that leads to that, did you find that like you felt judged for doing humanities, and like people undermined your like academic, like, yeah, you know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, so I think that was something I was actually going to talk about, is that I felt like I constantly had to prove myself, which also could have been self-imposed, that I felt that people were judging me, but it might not have been the truth. But I think there is, in South Africa especially, for a lot of reasons, a focus on profession-based degrees, where it's going to lead you to something that people know about. Like if you're studying law, you're going to become a lawyer. If you're studying chem eng, you're going to become a chemical engineer. So like it helps people understand you and your path. Whereas like if you're studying history and French, people are like, oh, so what are you going to do with that? Which I think made those kind of questions made me second guess my decision. And especially because I had kind of been contemplating between a business science or like a humanities. And I ended up going for the humanities with the thought of doing law in future. So I do think that that contributes. I think it depends which circles you're in though, because I think for a lot of people, it's almost admirable, not that it should be admirable, but like it is a good thing to do a humanities degree. But I think for the circles that I was in, a lot of people didn't really understand why I was studying what I was studying.
I also think language is a big part in that. You know, I know with chem eng we have to take humanities electives like a language, a humanities course, and you know people will be like, oh yeah, I'll just hand the project in like tonight. Like even though it is an elective for us, I feel like the way people speak about these subjects isn't right. Do you know what I mean? Like, yeah, you can hand it in tonight, but you're not going to do well. But people don't speak about it that way. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think that there is almost this false perception that like anyone can do a humanities degree and succeed at it, which I don't think is necessarily the case. I think that all degrees have value and all degrees are hard in different ways. So I think that it is important to realize and to make sure that how you speak about different degrees isn't trying to like undermine them. Even if you're having a tough time, like I think sometimes people mistake complaining about their tough time with undermining someone else's experience. So yeah, I think that that is something people should be wary of. I suppose I have a question with regards to Obake, you did a 4-year LLB, right?
I did a combined stream. So I did politics and law and then LLB.
Okay. So what was your, do you feel like you had a different experience in your LLB versus your humanities degree?
100%. Oh, sorry, continue.
No, just I'm interested to hear because I was wondering like what your perception was of humanities. Do you think that like you have similar thoughts to what I do?
Wow. It's actually quite wild that you're saying this, because I was going to ask a question just about law school in general and maybe just the ivory tower that is university. But yeah, I had such a different experience. So initially, I accepted an offer from UCT to do a 4-year LLB. And once I registered and everything, I just felt a lot of anxiety. We got like a 90-page reading, and they were like, "Do this for tomorrow," and I was just panicking. So I ended up moving and going into politics and history as my majors. Um, and I think the way that maybe our stories differ is that academically I was okay in first year. And I think it just had to do with me trying to prove that I could get back into law school. And so working overtime to get back and to get that 65% average. So it was that, and just a combination of um, combined with loving politics and really enjoying that as a subject, and really feeling like I'd found sort of the love of my life really early. um, but I do think that there is some sort of stigma. I mean, even people who study politics, there's a lot of stigma when it comes to humanities students about, oh, well, you just chose something that looks like a hard science, but it's actually very soft, you know? Um, and I think that's generally the case when it comes to humanities students. And um, that's something that I really wanted to ask you as well, is what you think the impact of, because we have a very like qualification based economy, and exactly like what you were saying, like, you know, a doctor, engineer, an accountant, you know, those are the things that really matter here. And I'm just really interested to hear from you what you think the impact of that sort of economy is on students' life choices and degree choices.
I mean, I think that particularly in South Africa, there is such job insecurity and there's such high unemployment rates that people don't have the luxury of saying, I want to study something that I'm interested in. I think there's family pressure. I think, yeah, I'm speaking not from experience here, but a lot of people are first generation going to university. And so I think that places a lot of pressure to do something that you will get some benefit from in terms of monetary benefit. Also because people, yeah, don't have the economic ability to just say, yeah, I want to do English and then spend my life writing, you know? I think versus, say, for example, the UK, I know one of my friends went to study there, and most people study geography, which is like a very interesting field, because then they go and do like a master's in law or something like that. So I think that here, also based on the fact, because of the way that things operate, that, you know, you do a politics master's if you've studied politics, you do a law master's if you've studied law. Things are just different here. And I think, yeah, it's largely because of like cultural, socioeconomic factors. But I think that there are some circles in which it's more because people don't understand. So I think like a lot of people think that, yeah, it's harder to do like actuarial sciences or medicine than to do a humanities, and so I think they pride themselves in perpetuating that distinction.
I also think what's bad is with the system that we have, it forces people to choose very early on into a very specialized course. What's horrible is it narrows us down so much, and it doesn't leave possibility for people who are gifted in other ways, even though they could be, you know, in one field. So yeah, I think that's very dangerous about our system. And in that way, I don't think it's very right, because it forces you to narrow down to this point when you're so young. Yeah.
So I think, yeah, that's what I would say about my benefits from doing a humanities degree that was very general. I took an elective in computer science. I took an elective in classics. Like I kind of was able to explore more what I was interested in, as opposed to people who narrow down very quickly it becomes a lot more about finishing rather than getting an experience. But I also think that, yeah, as I said, a lot of people don't have the privilege of being able to say, I want to experience this.
Yeah, like
I
it's
also
I need to finish and pay my bursary off. That's that. Yeah.
exactly, like
Yeah.
my
And
students.
there's a lot of bursaries in like professional fields as well. There's not a lot of bursaries for humanities that I'm aware of. But
I think also like lots of firms will pay for your studies if you go and work for them. Like I think Deloitte has a program like that, and I'm sure a lot of the law firms help you out like that. Whereas like if you're doing a humanities degree, I don't think like a lot of the places that you'll be applying to will help you out in that way.
Sure. It's crazy. I have so many questions now. But I completely agree with what you're saying about how a lot of people aren't afforded the space for just self-exploration in university. And I wonder, I mean, one regret that I have from my undergrad is combining law with politics and feeling like, there were so many other things. I mean, I'm in a space now where I have no intention of being a lawyer whatsoever. I want to be, I want to go into public policy consulting, and I realize, oh my word, economics really matters. And, having these conversations with myself and realizing I could have, done economics in my undergrad and then done a postgraduate degree in law. But because of these sort of expectations, I think part of these expectations are just projections from my side. But, you do feel this expectation of, I graduated with this and this, and, this particular major, or, I graduated in 1 year less time. And I think that there is a time pressure when it comes to university. So I think it's really interesting that you were talking about self-exploration. And I wonder if that can't be applied to, if that can't be applied to the degree itself. So I think when we have our degrees, we have a degree in, for example, engineering, or we have a degree in civil engineering, electrical engineering, but we don't really unpack that and sort of, first and foremost, there's no primacy on the individual in that degree. It's sort of, how many people are we churning out here to be sort of a cog in the machine, right? So I think that there's that element of there's no real center of the human being, that we're actually teaching someone to explore themselves and to explore the world around them. But I think another element is the idea that we don't really know what skill sets are actually involved in certain degrees. So I think we prioritize engineering and law and accounting because we assume, well, those are the high paying degrees, right? So they're probably the most prestigious. But when we start breaking things down, we say, well, what about reading a lot of pages in an hour, or being able to have very sophisticated and polished debates about society and what's going on in society? How is that not valued in our society? I think that's just an interesting point that I want to pick at more.
And I also think in terms of, I mean, I don't know if this is just UCT, but most of our lecturers, I mean, I've literally been emailed by a lecturer saying, I only do this because I have to do it with my PhD. Like there's a lot of lecturers that aren't passionate about lecturing, they aren't passionate about their students, they aren't passionate about learning. So they're just churning out a whole bunch of lectures, cool, pitch up, do the lecture, leave. And there's no inspiration of minds. And I mean, obviously there are a few lecturers that are like that. But I mean, I found in general, especially in engineering, it seems very mundane, very boring. Just give them what they need to do, slap bang, 2017 test, done. And I don't know if that's just the type of university we're at, but I wish there was a focus, like Obo was saying, about the person. Let's inspire minds. Let's create people of the future. It doesn't feel like that. It feels like a big machine that we're just trying to churn out more engineers.
So I definitely had that, I think, in my undergrad, because I came from a school environment where I felt like I knew all my teachers and my peers by name, and they all knew me, and it felt like they were personally invested in my success. And so that was something that I really valued. And coming to university and having quite an impersonal, anonymous space was tough, because it felt like you were the one who had to motivate yourself, which, I mean, that's how it is. But also, it didn't feel like you had this mentor that was like trying to challenge you to be the best version of yourself and reach your full potential. I think I kind of, maybe in third year, when I did more elective based subjects in my undergrad, I found that subsided a bit, because I did have more one-on-one contact with my lecturers, and it felt like more of a class space as opposed to a lecture space. And so I think that changed it for me. And now also in law, I feel like I think also there's this perception that like you and the lecturer are divided. Like they are your lecturer and they stand and lecture you, and like you're the student and you listen and occasionally contribute in class. And I think for the first time with my law degree, I've actually gone and like spoken to my lecturers and like asked them questions, like had consultations with them, which I'd never done before except for my thesis. And so I think that really changed a lot for me, because suddenly like my lecturers knew my name, or one of them knew my name, and I felt like it was no longer this impersonal, anonymous space. And I think that that's something also that needs to be normalized, is like going to speak to your lecturers and like getting to know your lecturers on a deeper level than just them standing in front of you. I also wanted to speak about Obake's point about time pressure. I think that is something that I've also felt now, especially. I was lucky in that I matriculated when I was 17, so I started uni when I was 17. So I always in the back of my mind have this feeling that I have time, because I'm like, everyone's a year older than me. So I think that though is something that does worry me. And I have a friend now who is studying with me who's turning 25 I think she's graduating when she's 25. That like having people around you who are of different ages, I think we often surround ourselves with people who are very similar to us. And so for me, and this also comes with like from my childhood, thinking that at 24 I'd be like married and have a family, kind of, which is not what I want. But I think, yeah, exposing yourself to different people who have done different things and not just like studied, gotten a job and worked their whole life in that job is really helpful. And I think that also just comes from speaking to people and trying to hear different people's experiences. I think then also another thing that I wanted to comment on is about university kind of being like churning out students. I think that what I've found is a feeling that actually, like when you're applying for jobs, they care more about the skills you've learned and the skills you've developed, the experiences you've had and how you've overcome them, as opposed to just having this perfect experience that you can, just talk about from A to B. I think that what is valued is how you can reflect on your experiences, as opposed to always being the best. And I think that only came with like when I realized, when I spoke to people in like the profession and realizing different people's experiences, and that it's not always such a focus on what you think they focus on.
I've had like a different experience to that, because everyone always told me like, oh, people skills, like, your experiences, what you've overcome matters. But I mean, I've been applying for quite a lot of internships and back works, and I've literally been rejected to some before I've even finished my application, because I'd put my GPA in and it's rejected me straight out. They literally didn't even receive my application. They just were like, GPA, cool, done. So, it's we say that, but I don't know if that happens in practice. Like, I mean, and at the same time, people are like, oh, you must overcome things. Like, it's good to have hard experiences and overcome them. But I'm like, that takes a toll, mate. Like, you're going to need a year of extending your degree. Like, shit goes wrong. Like, it's not that easy just to churn out and get your degree in 4 years and go through this awesome life challenging experience. And, I'm finding that quite frustrating because, I've always told myself, a lot of my friends know this in Cambridge, own race, own pace. I'm studying with girls who were in grade 10 when I was in matric, and, I laugh about it and like, I'm just like, own race, own pace. But when you're applying to jobs, it's, I don't know, that doesn't seem to be as chilled as I thought.
Yeah, interesting. It's an interesting conversation, and I suppose like we all hear different things, but we don't really know what they consider.
Yeah.
I do. Yeah, there is obviously like a minimum that from which they consider for some jobs.
Literally 3.5 GPA.
Yeah.
I was like, try and fail a subject and maintain a 3.5.
Yeah. I suppose like my issue also comes in sometimes with the fact that like there is quite a marks-based focus in your degree, and I suppose in the education system in South Africa is like, achieving 8 A's or like achieving 7 A's or whatever, that's your goal, as opposed to, I think, the skills that you build along the way and the process of learning. And I suppose that does come from the fact that they need a standardized system, but I think in some ways it's flawed because you end up just working to complete the curriculum as opposed to trying to like build better, more educated, more inspired students.
I think I want to take us back to something that was said a few moments ago, where we were talking about how university isn't very individualized for the person, or doesn't really serve the individual, right? And we said that lecturers tend to be quite impersonal and that they don't really care about, teaching, but they just have to do it, right? Because of their own graduate commitments or postdoctoral commitments. But what if the converse is also true, in the sense that I know my experience of law school, I think, is different to you, in the sense that I hate law school. I hate it with all my life. And what the reason why I hate it is because I think that there's quite an emphasis on meritocracy, especially within the law faculty. And there's an emphasis on, being sort of the bright minds of the country. And, we have some sort of high standard. And if you don't meet that high standard, you don't belong here. At least those were some of the lecturers that we had, who've since left. But it definitely stays with you, that sort of element of, we're pushing you to be the best. And if you're not the best, how did you get here in the first place? And I'm just wondering if that's not equally toxic, in the sense that, we're pushing people to sort of push the boundaries of academia, and we're not realizing that in the process of doing that, we're actually creating highly insecure human beings who feel that, they don't amount to anything within the degree that they're studying. So I just wanted to know, when there's an emphasis on, the Socratic method of learning, you really have to be a scholar, you know what I mean? And
you're referring to.
oh yeah, yeah. When there's such an emphasis on, like, you have to be such a, you have to just be motivated on your own and be this bright scholar and working through these issues and these things on your own. How healthy is that just for a human being who is quite young still and needs some sort of guidance?
I think that's a really interesting topic. I think in some senses, which is probably toxic, I've thrived off that. I do like quite a pressurized environment. I think for me, like, I enjoy feeling, I don't know if it is because I am slightly competitive, that I quite like being in that environment where everyone's, high achieving, and I feel like it pushes me to try and do better. I don't know if that's healthy for me. I think my stress levels don't necessarily always show, but they show in terms of my body. I have quite a few gray hairs. And yeah, so I think
Oops,
I think it's a tough one.
I think it has to do with school environment, not competitive at all. I didn't find it competitive. It was you do you for you. We didn't have auto recognition. It was very like if you were a provincial squash player, you knew that and you were chuffed for yourself. And I loved that. And I found when I went to Cambridge or went to UCT and suddenly everyone was chatting marks, everyone was super competitive, I found that incredibly difficult. And I also didn't like that. Like, I mean, even in Cambridge, they're like, we're the top this in the country and you should be this, and, all this big chat. And it's like, not really fitting into this bubble, and it constantly makes you feel like you're not in the right place. Where at school, it was an environment where I was never told I had to be anything. I never was, the best girls' school in the country. I wasn't, I was just me. So yeah, I think it's very linked to your environment. You went to a very competitive, high pressured school. So
Yeah, so I think that's so interesting. I think, yeah, for me, our school it was very competitive.
yeah,
I don't think a lot of people hated it because of that.
yeah,
And in hindsight, know that that was the reason they hated it, because they would always say, we were the best girls' school in the country last year, you better make us proud again this year. They would total the average number of A's per student and send out an email. We got 4.2 A's per student this year, and this many students got 100% in history and art and whatever. So it was very competitive. Many people did 8 or 9 subjects instead of 7. We had like AP Maths, AP English, and I think I like, which a lot of people would disagree with me, to some extent I like that, because I also think that I'm quite a laid back person. I don't know if lots of people would describe me as laid back, but for me it's easy to brush that off and be like, I don't really care, like that's so ridiculous that they expect this of us. But for a lot of people, they internalize that and it becomes something that they consistently think of to, yeah, like,
I also think that's where you like question, like especially like as parents, is this the right environment for your kid? I know a lot of people left my school because they found that it wasn't competitive enough in sport and this and that, and went to other schools and did incredibly well. So I think it's once again like finding that environment. But the thing is with universities, you can't find that environment. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah. But I do agree that to some extent, like, it isn't productive to continuously emphasize those points. I think for me, it was easy to brush off, but it is like, I know a lot of people with certain of our lecturers get incredibly frustrated because they feel like they are being undermined. Whereas for me, I almost feel that it's challenging me to be better, which I think is what they aim to do, but sometimes it's miscommunicated to seem belittling or undermining, or like people aren't succeeding. And so I think a lot of it is how you are as a person and how you interpret things. For me, I think my experience of law school has also been different because of my undergrad, and because I think time to really make sure that this is what I want to do. And so feeling like this is what I've been wanting to do for the past 3 years. And so now, like, I'm going to put my all into it. But I think it's been a positive experience having university from home this year, because I think this year could have been the final straw that made me not enjoy those emails anymore. It made me enjoy the pressurized environment, because I
think, I mean, like Cambridge has the 4-year degree program, 5-year, and like there's different like programs, and I think there should be different programs in every system. I know that's very difficult financially, resources and stuff, but I think, you know, catering for people who work at different paces, who are going through different things, who operate in different ways. I don't know. I think that's. Then there's also that stigma around that it's for like disadvantaged communities, and you know how problematic that is in itself, because it's not. So yeah, it's challenging things.
Yeah, I think that's something I found really interesting that I saw in the course outline, the handbook for law, is that they're actually eradicating that 5-year program, which I found an interesting move, because I think it helped a lot of people who needed time to adjust to university and hadn't been in the same academic space that they have to face at UCT. So I think that's an interesting observation.
Like, how do we expect people to come out of university all at the same level? You know, with the differences in this country in terms of education systems, you know, we expect people to be at the same level as everyone else who went to the top private school in the country, and how damaging that is for people.
Yeah, I think that also, again, is like why I feel comfortable with the pressures, because I think academically now I am doing fine. But if I wasn't, it just isn't the same. I think that to have that added pressure, that unnecessary pressure that puts, I think it just exemplifies all the problems with inequality in our country, because it means that people who suffer most are those who are least secure in their position.
So just on that then, what's the next step, right? So do we train people, or do we train universities to be more accepting and accommodating of people who have different ways of learning and experiencing the world? Or do we leave it as is, because we know that the economy itself is a highly meritocratic, highly, you know, fast-paced economy? So what do we do? Or does the economy itself need restructuring? I think these are all, you know, questions, and how realistic is it for the economy to be restructured in a developing nation that isn't fully industrialized yet? You know what I mean? So there's so many layers to this thing. And unfortunately, that's where I think development also becomes a problem, in the sense that because we're a developing country, we can't pay attention to all these other sort of factors. And so we have, like what Carmen is saying, it becomes incredibly damaging in the process for a lot of people who are going to university or who are entering the economy and aren't being accommodated the way they should be.
And it leads to people pushing themselves in really unhealthy ways. I mean, I've seen people work in Cambridge in ways that should, I mean, I'm sure you've seen in law library as well. You know, people are pushing themselves to limits that is not okay. And it's to keep up with this demand that society's placed on them. And it's so difficult for me to see. I mean, I think because I'm someone who struggles, you know, who has some like learning, you know, difficulties or different ways of thinking. I mean, I also have to work incredibly hard. And you see people who went to top private schools go home straight in project week at 3:00 in the afternoon, when other students are sitting there till 4 a.m. And that damaging effect of them not thinking they're good enough. And I'm lucky because I can see both sides of the coin, because I went to a private school. I have all the resources. I've got like 3 years ahead of me of people I know I can pick up the phone to be like, dude, please send stuff to me. But then I also am, you know, slower, or I work at a different pace. So seeing that and just seeing how damaging it is, you know, it's, we're losing a lot of people. Let's just say it that way. You know, I think
also, I think, yeah, it's such a damaging cycle, because I think what ends up happening is that, yeah, people who, I think it's largely related to inequality, that people who are who are less privileged end up being further what's the right word, their position is less secure than it would have been because of the systems in place. I think, Obake, related to what you were saying, I think what is so tough is that there is this focus in our country on professions as opposed to maybe like innovation. I think that in terms of the economy, I think I'm trying to remember my African economic history and my like development economics courses, because there's interesting case studies in developing countries of how they've managed to leapfrog certain other nations, and because of innovation and because of like strong strong governance and institutions. And I think that in South Africa, our weak institutions, luckily we still have like a strong judiciary, and the Bill of Rights helps back everything up. But I think that we have fairly weak institutions, or they are eroding over time. And I think that makes things harder to develop at a pace that everyone else is developing. And I think that then leads to like job insecurity and gaps in the market, unemployment, which all trickles down. So I don't know, like if there is.
I think another point on that is to stay a global player, we almost need to keep, the structure that we currently have as a university and an economic, like we could accommodate everyone and help everyone, but would we keep that like academic global standing? So that's what I find difficult. And I think one of the best ways I've seen my department overcome that is through mentorship. So you can go literally every meridian and get help, and no one knows that you're there. It's like private little tutoring sessions. And so in that way, helping people with, keeping them part of the stream, like making resources available, but without lowering the standard. And like the standard, unfortunately, is the global standard, which is, I don't know what the word was, metoric, that big word there. What was it?
Meritocracy.
Yep, that one. So, I think we need to keep that, unfortunately, to be a global player, like unless the whole world shifts in a certain direction. And for now, I think as a country, mentorship, tutoring, having really strong support systems behind this system is the only way to really make it work.
I completely agree with that. I think that mentoring, a lot of the reason why I think I excelled in school was because there were structures in place that helped you to excel. It was your teachers knowing your name, your teachers knowing, a lot about you and being able to give you personal help. And if you needed it, you knew where to find it. And there were resources. I think the problem is at university, when it's a competitive environment, people aren't always willing to share their resources because they want a foot up, which is problematic. I think also just the inherent lack of resources that people have, not having Wi-Fi, laptops, and then things, like COVID that comes and just worsens that inequality. So I think that, yeah, it's important to have those structures. I think, as you were saying, mentorship and to have people to hold you accountable is very important, and people who you can go to get that assistance that you need.
And so, yeah, I would say like a big thing that needs to change in our university systems is that personability between lectures and students. You know, if you look at the dropout rates of our university system and our school system, it's honestly shocking. And I genuinely think if people were held more accountable by their teachers, you know, that would make a massive difference. And if they had someone to answer to, you know, I know something that got me really.
They try that. It's often not taken very seriously. I know I had a mentor in law school, and it wasn't the closest relationship. I think sometimes the vetting process isn't so good. I also think, yeah, that the bridging the divide between student and lecturer is important, and having lecturers who do care about your success and make it known that that's the reason that they challenge you, rather than thinking that you aren't adequate, you know.
Yeah, I agree with that.
People that look like you.
That because my experience has been having people who look like me, and this is going to sound so problematic, I don't want to say it, but people who look like me have been probably the worst to me. I've just had, I think there's this element within with Black people specifically about, just again, the word meritocracy is very big, and it's the idea that if I want to succeed in a space, I need to be 10 times better than the next person. And once you have that mentality, it's very hard for you to understand when another Black person doesn't have the same mentality. So what you'll find is that you'll have a lecturer who went to like Yale Law School to do their LLM, and then they're doing their PhD at Oxford now, and they're just such amazing. Yes, it is sort of the toxic side of Black excellence, in the sense that, you know, you are achieving so much, and when you have another student who looks like you, who says, I'm barely scraping a 50, or, you know, maybe I'm not as gifted as you are in a particular area, it becomes, well, you need to pull up your socks. I'm not going to accommodate you in this area. I'm not sure you guys can relate, but it's something that we do notice as Black students, that it's incredibly toxic. the interaction that we have with each other within the community.
Yeah, I unfortunately, you know, can't relate 100%, but I've had a conversation with a friend of mine who is an Alan Gray fellow, she, a Black woman, and she ended up extending her degree with me, and we doing like the 5-year program, and just the like horribleness she had to go through with, you know, like failing that like Black excellence side, and everyone being like, well, you know, you're not good enough anymore. And I mean, at least I just had kind of my own kind of disappointment, and just knowing that this is what I need to do for me. I didn't have that whole, you know, added like I'm not special anymore, you know. She was like, it's so difficult. I mean, she ended up like overcommitting herself completely to societies and stuff to try and prove that she's, you know, special or excellent. And I can completely understand how damaging that is, because it's like, it's not just enough to like be doing a degree and, you know, being special in your own way. I can understand that.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think because I just had read this meme the other day that said like, let's all have the self-confidence of a mediocre white male. And I think that it is a lot of, it's race-based, and I think sometimes gender-based. I think, yeah, it's interesting how that all plays into expectations of your success.
Oops. Sorry,
No.
do you think it feeds into like do you find that there's like almost an explosive confidence that the Black community demands of you? Like, you have to think you're the absolute best. You need to tell everyone that you are awesome and a masterpiece and everything. And it leads to that sort of, not oversell. Do you know what I'm trying to say? Like, I don't know how to explain it. Let me know if you know what I mean.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I think in the world that we live in, the society that we live in, you, as a Black person, you sort of have to market yourself because the first thing that people see is the color of your skin, and immediately they have connotations, right, with regards to your skin color. So I do think that there is this sort of renaissance that's happening, and I do think it was brought about by the Fees Must Fall movement. That's just basically saying that we are amazing and that we need to punt that a lot more. I do think it's toxic if we're doing it to prove something than just realizing that we already are excellent just by existing.
Yeah, like it's awesome if it's an inherent belief, but it's like if you don't, if you're not like internalizing that as well as like projecting it on the outside. But I think that'll come as society.
I feel like it stems, I mean, I'm speaking not from experience, but I think from what I understand, it's also to try and combat that systemic oppression and that constant generations of being told that you aren't enough, that you end up having to project it in such a way that, and I mean, I can't judge if that's like right or wrong. I don't know if it's a burden to bear to have to constantly, but I think it's more of a burden to bear to feel like you're not enough and to have people not believe that you're enough.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. I think that there needs to be, to some extent, there does need to be an overt sort of marketing, just because our discourse has been so white for a long time, and white has been the norm. I'm sorry, I'm not trying to offend anyone. White has been the norm, right?
It's the truth.
And it's been very difficult for Black people to be presented in the media, in discourse, in academia, etc., in professions, as inherently intelligent or gifted in some way. And so I think, as much as that was sort of an overt attempt by whiteness and Western standards to prove that they are the norm and that they are the standard, I think there needs to be like an equal energy with regards to like Black people marketing themselves and the whole Black is beautiful, Black is intelligent, Black is excellence movement.
Yeah, and it's like, I don't know what the quote is right now, but it's like, you won't get change from doing things peacefully or something like that. Like there needs to be something strong, something big for change to be taking place. The chances of this happening without this overt movement wouldn't really be possible.
I suppose a point to do with whether having people that look like you makes you feel like you can achieve more is interesting, because I think somehow ingrained in me is the belief that white old law professors know more than what I do or what I ever will. But then again, and I don't know if this is something that permeates a lot of my thoughts, but it's more that I think the discourse that we're exposed to, I was thinking about this because of jurisprudence, where there's not a single female legal philosopher whose readings we read. And I don't know if that's because there aren't any, but I'm sure that there must be, because
I can speak in engineering. I find it very toxic because everything's male. Even the places you apply to, like there's basically one or two female people who work there. Like there's
and so important because she was like young and intelligent, and her growth trajectory was impressive, and she was so knowledgeable. And then I think it's more the lack of people who look like me that makes me think that other people are more intelligent than the fact that if I were to see them, I would think that they are as intelligent as others. So for example, like if there were female legal philosophers that we read, I wouldn't think they were any less intelligent compared to the males, but the clear lack thereof makes me believe that, the male's perspective is more important, or like is cleverer, or is more valid, you know?
Yeah, or more suited to that role or that position.
Yeah, it's interesting. I suppose that also the racial aspect has to do with decolonizing our education, and the fact that we don't really read many Black academics' work in, say, for example, jurisprudence or delict or things like that. Yeah, it makes you wonder the impact of colonization on our education system.
But what are your guys' thoughts on the glow up culture mentality? So I don't know if you've heard of, it's basically the idea of just becoming a better version of yourself or the best version of yourself. Is it, in one respect, I feel like it's great for people to feel like they need to develop and evolve. But at the same time, I think that there's such an emphasis on being like a cool human being and developing in like certain places and certain areas that I find that glow up culture becomes a little bit toxic. And I find that glow up culture happens mostly at university, because now you have the time and you have more resources, which I think in and of itself, I'm sorry, I'm rambling, but in and of itself, it's a little bit problematic when we look at class, for example, and how depending on what class you're in, it can be very difficult for you to self-actualize. But yeah, what are you guys' thoughts on that?
I suppose I've never really thought about it in that way. I think maybe it does feed into what I was saying of feeling like you have to be this best version of yourself when you move on from school. It's, yeah, that kind of idea that you've glowed up. I think it places a lot of pressure on you to become better, which sometimes is hard, like given the circumstances. And I do also think that a lot of these movements are for like people in the upper echelons of society, because they have the resources and the time to think of things like that. And for a lot of people, they can't think about like more trivial things that we maybe place more emphasis on.
Yeah, I mean, just because of like who I am, like I'm very like soul based and like a bit spiritual in that way. But my issue with glow up culture is it seems very facade-y, and I wonder how much of that goes deeper. And yeah, I think that just worries me, you know, because I think, you know, the biggest glow up for me is seeing someone who's doing a whole lot better in a better mental health space, in a, you know what I'm trying to say, like in a better soul space. And I think often with glow up culture, it's like getting your nails done super long, eyelashes looking fleek, you know, your hair's all this, you skinny, you this, you that, or you're curvy. You know, it's a lot to do with like how you're looking. And I just don't know how deep that's going, and also how toxic that is, because we're spending so much time and money focusing on our exterior. And it's like, how much of that same focus is going into sorting things out below the surface?
Yeah, that's so true.
Yeah, like in one aspect, it's cool to always strive to be better. But when it's just about looking better, that's when I have a problem with it. And sometimes you can see someone look so amazing, like they've got all the brands on, they're looking so dope, but I'm like, in your eyes, I can see you're not happy. And I'm like, I would have way preferred this, like the non-glowed up version of you that was happy. You know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah. So I think in that way, then sort of the university or the powers that be are not the only toxic force on a university student's life. I think we can be incredibly toxic to one another, because I think that, yeah, you know, I think we set ourselves standards and we project,
well.
right? We project our own sort of visions and dreams for ourselves onto other people. And we say, oh, you know, I really wish I weighed below 70 kgs and my skin was like popping, my hair was popping, you know what I mean? And in that way, I think there's so many different forces on the average individual in university that it's not just restricted to faculty and tutors and academics, but it's our community, our varsity community as well.
Yeah, and I think especially like with social media, you're very pressurized to look a certain way. Like there's I can picture what glow up looks like right now as we're sitting here. Do you know what I mean? And that's bad because we're all so different. Like, even though Ruby and I are both white, we have completely different looks and we should have different glow ups. But why can I picture the standard right now in my head? And I think, yeah, it's what we do at university to each other as a society is just as bad. And I completely agree with that. Like we can say, yeah.
No, I completely agree. I think that the university, but I think that this is like the struggle you'll get throughout your life, is that now, especially with social media, we're so exposed to other people's like 2-dimensional stories that things get reduced to much less than what they actually are. So we get obviously a photoshopped image of how people perceive themselves and how people are succeeding. I think this is a realization I've also had recently, is that a lot is to do, like a lot of life and a lot of success is to do with how you market yourself. Like I think people who sound impressive, often it's because they know how to talk about themselves in a way that sheds a positive light on them. And I think often people undervalue themselves. And I think that this is especially a problem with women. I don't know if it is, but it is like with imposter syndrome. I know that it's definitely affects women more than it does men. But I think it's this feeling that you're inadequate, but sometimes it's more just that like someone who has the same qualifications, the same life experience as you, has just marketed themselves in a way that sounds more impressive. And I think, yeah, that's also something I struggle with a lot, is like just self-doubt. And I suppose that's something I maybe developed at university, being in more of a space where there are loads of different people, like different genders. I don't know. I think something at school where I felt pretty secure in my position. I knew that I was academic. I knew that I was like mediocre at running. There were certain things like, yeah.
Because it was very much people, I'm speaking from a white perspective that went to white private schools. Like it's validating to have people that talk, do, and be like you. Do you know what I'm saying? Where, I've definitely noticed now with all the issues being exposed about racism at especially like white private schools, is you realize how different that experience was for someone else. And I especially think school, if you're in a school that's like you, is so validating and you feel so safe and
100%.
And the minute you go into a space that's like got a lot of different people, I'm sure like even in the humanities department, like all the different genders, and there is in every department, but I think it's more highlighted there. It makes you feel unsettled and then you start questioning yourself. But that's also cool. It's also the coolest part about university is to cool.
I think also like the structures imposed on at school, like there was a lot of external structure, which is something that I definitely found was beneficial to me. And so there was almost a limit to what you could achieve, or a limit to what you could do in a day. Whereas at university, it seems the limits are boundless. Like people are doing so many different things, people are achieving so many different things. And so it becomes a bit unsettling to try and locate yourself within this like world of no limits,